I wanted to do hopefully a short study so we can have some time for prayer. But my study tonight is on Jesus praying. And let me just ask you a couple of questions. Why would Jesus pray? What reasons would we give for that? Why would he pray?
He was still dependent on the Father.
Okay, because he needed the Father in order to do what God had called him to do. Any other reasons why?
To set example.
By me?
To set example.
Okay, an example for us to see that he was praying. Okay, that's a good one too. And any other one?
That was his way of communicating with the Father, talking with him every day.
Okay, well, why was he doing that? Why would he do that?
What was the question again?
Why was Jesus praying? Why did we find him praying? We're going to look at examples and instructions and different things about Jesus praying. But why would he need to pray? Why would he bother to pray? He was God. Geraldine said because of his dependence on the Father. What was the other answers?
The Trinity. So he wanted to make sure he was in the will of his Father.
What's that?
Because the Trinity, he'd have to make sure he was in the will of his Father, so to have communication.
Okay, so communication, so he could know the will of the Father. There was another one, someone said.
Example.
A good example, that it was an example to us. If he prayed, I'm sure that we need to.
Be in relationship?
What's that?
To be in, relationship?
Yeah, well, why would he want to be in a relationship?
Because he was part of the Trinity?
Because what?
Because it's good? It's part of the Trinity?
Okay, yeah, well, why?
Because
What's that?
because even though he was fully God, he was fully man.
Okay, so that's expressing his dependence on the Father.
Right, okay.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, give me a word as to why he wants to be in a relationship with the Father besides the clinical answer that he was in the Trinity.
He needs it.
Give me a better word than that.
Oh my goodness.
Dependent?
We already said dependence and he needs it.
Dependent.
Because he loved.
Reliance?
Hi, what did you say?
Because he loved his father.
Because he loved his Father.
Okay.
Do you see how you went all around that?
Yeah.
Everything else you said was true, but he had a love relationship with his Father. Remember that God is love. And before there was ever anything else, there was the love between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He couldn't be love if he was only one person, because love is giving yourself away to someone else, right?
Yeah.
And so there was a love relationship with his Father that he had with him before the worlds began, is what he said. So those are good reasons, but don't forget the one, because he loved his Father. And his Father
Loved him.
loved the Son, right?
Yeah.
So, and I want you to think about that in terms of why should you pray? And why would you pray? And does the Father really love you? And do you actually love God? I've heard a lot of people, Christians, say, "Oh, I love God, but," and then when after the but comes, I don't pray hardly at all. No, I don't. I know I'm not obeying him, but I love him. And my answer to that is, I want you to come down off of that little pillar you're on and realize, no, that's not what love is. Love translates itself into action. So there's nothing wrong with me admitting that, hey, I'm not in love with God right now. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. That's the case. Truth is always better. But then, okay, God, why is that? And what can be done about it? Right? But anyway, that's a whole other subject. I just wanted to throw the question out. We know that Jesus said, I do nothing of myself. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous. I don't seek my own will, but the will of the Father who sent me. So this expression in John 5:30 is that expression of absolute dependence upon the Father. That he laid aside his own abilities, his own strength, his own power, and his own wisdom and knowledge, and he acquired it from the Father as he went step by step. But there is no question that he loved his Father. So I just want to kind of quickly have you think about, if Jesus' life was full of prayer, and that's what I want you to see here tonight, where does my life need to be? Well, I need to pray a little bit.
No.
But wouldn't you say if Jesus needed to pray, in order to make it, in order to do what the Father's will was for him, he had to be in prayer? How much more you and me? You can't make it. I can't make it without prayer. I need God, and I need him deeply and richly in my life. Hugh mentioned something last night as we were doing instructions on and actually we're on prayer, but he mentioned this verse, and it's something I had never noticed before in this particular verse. And it was at the baptism of Jesus. It says this: when all the people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also was baptized, Luke 3:21, and while he prayed, the heaven was opened. I had never seen that in all the years of ministry and Bible reading. I had never noticed that Jesus was praying at his baptism. So, that's significant that we find him praying.
Yeah, and the next verse as well.
What's that?
The next verse as well.
Yeah, well, the next verse, we see some other verse, but this one I had never noticed. That's all I'm saying. That right at the beginning of his ministry, at the very start of it, what we find Jesus doing? He's praying.
When did you discover it?
Last night.
No.
Yeah, because you
It took a long time.
Yeah, you mentioned it in his
That's cool.
in his teaching. He started with that verse, and I was like, "Oh, wow! I've never seen that because it's not in the other Gospels. When Jesus got baptized, it's not mentioned, but it appears in the Gospel of Luke. But it's amazing what you can miss in the Word of God. No matter how long you've read it, no matter what you've seen, there are things that they're like precious nuggets still to be found.
Yes.
And in Mark, so we're going to look at verses where he prayed. Okay, so Matthew 14:23, when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up in the mountain by himself to pray. When evening had come, he was alone there. Now this is just after he fed the 5,000, or actually it was the 6,000, and there were 3,000 in this time. So this was the second time that he fed the multitudes. He went up in the mountain to pray, and he was alone there, or maybe the first time. No, thanks, but I like it though. And so you find Jesus going up in the mountain to pray alone. So we see that not only did he need to pray, but he needed to get away to pray.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage you that as busy as life is, get away to pray. If you don't get away to pray, you'll be distracted. If you have your phone on, if you're waiting for calls, if you're waiting for the dings on Facebook, or if it's business on the phone, or whatever it is, you won't spend much time praying. You'll be distracted. So look for every opportunity. Susanna Wesley was a woman of God. She was the mother of Charles Wesley, which eventually became the Methodist churches, the Wesleyan churches, and eventually I think the Nazarene churches actually came out of that movement. So there's Charles Wesley, who was the hymn writer who wrote, I think, thousands of hymns. And then there's John Wesley, who was a preacher. They grew up, and Susanna was their mother, and she had, I forget, 10 children at least, maybe more. Busy household. But she set a standard in her house that when she took her apron and put it up over her face, she was not to be disturbed. That the children were to be silent because she was praying. People would come to the door and ask to see their mother, and the children's answer would be, "She has an appointment right now. She cannot see you until that appointment is over." That's how determined she was to make sure that she had that hour alone with God. So I don't know how hectic your life is, but I know mine is hectic, and I know all of us. We live in a hectic life with a hectic world. If you are not going to take time to meet with God, then you are going to find yourself deficient and broken. Jesus sent the disciples away even here in Mark 6:46 because he needed to go alone and pray. So that's something to think about. Remember, if Jesus did these things, what do I need? If he needed an hour, I need two. And in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, verse 15, it says, the report went around concerning him all the more. And this was after he had healed the lepers. And great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. So what did he do about it? So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. Even in ministry, and I can be, believe me, I can be going 24/7 in ministry. And some days I feel like I am, other days not so much. But even in ministry, you can't continue to do ministry without prayer. You'll burn out. You can't live without prayer. And so here was the Lord Jesus. He was doing all these things, preaching. He was doing healing. They were hearing the messages from him, but he often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. So the busier you are, the more time you need to pray. I think it was Martin Luther that said, I find myself so busy that instead of spending, I think it was 3 hours in prayer in the morning, I have to spend 4. Now, usually what we say, I find myself so busy that if I was spending half an hour in prayer, I have to cut it to 15 minutes because I'm so busy, right? Let me tell you, God can do more with your time. Here's a little phrase for you. If you take time with Jesus, he'll make time for you. If you actually take time with Jesus. You can be running your feet off
That's a song that I used to sing.
and get nowhere.
Yeah.
What was the song? Do you remember?
Take time out for Jesus. He took time for you.
Yeah, that's he took time for you, which is true.
Don't know.
But what I'm saying, he'll make time for you. He can do more in 5 minutes than you can do in a whole day. Whether it's your business or whether it's your family life, whether it's your cleaning your home, whatever it is, if you will take time for Jesus, God can do much more in the time that's left. We think we have to, and we cheat ourselves of the real blessings of God. Now, Jesus had a major decision that he was going to make. He was going to choose the 12 disciples. So what did he do about that?
Pray.
Luke 6:12, what does it say he did? It came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. All night. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles. He didn't just casually flip through life. Everything was done wrapped in prayer, asking God, the Father, looking to the Father for wisdom and direction all night in prayer to God. Amazing. He not only went off and prayed by himself, but also he prayed for people. Here in Matthew 19:13, the little children were brought to him, and that he might put his hands on them and pray. But the disciples rebuked them. What was he doing? He was putting his hands on the little children, and he was praying for them. In Luke 9:18, it happened as he was alone praying, the disciples joined him, and he asked them, saying, "Who do the crowd say that I am?" So what was he doing? He was alone praying. So you find over and over in the scriptures, Jesus taking time to be alone praying. And there he asked them a question. Of course, a great revelation came as he was the Christ, the Son of the living God. As what Peter said, and the Lord said, "Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." In Luke 9:28. And here I want you to see something different here. Not only did he pray alone, but there were times when he took people with him to pray, where he realized the need of prayer, not only for himself, but also with others. Now it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings that he took Peter, John, and James, in Luke 9:28, and went up on the mountain to pray. And then as he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered, his robe became white and glistening, and that was the time when Moses and Elijah appeared with him. And while he was praying, and he had called the other disciples to come and pray with him, what were they doing?
Sleeping.
They were sleeping. they were sleeping. And I think maybe often enough the Spirit of God may be prompting us to prayer and we're sleeping. Maybe not physically sleeping, but spiritually sleeping. We need to be in the presence of God. They woke up and they were blown away. Moses was there, Elijah was there, and Peter got so excited that he said, Lord, let's make 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. 3 tents. Now, why would he do that? What do you think?
Isn't that how, like, when they were in the wilderness, they
Made boots, yes,
Yeah.
but they weren't in the wilderness now. They were on the mountaintop, and Moses and Elijah had appeared. What do you think Peter's greatest desire was? What would you say it was by that request?
He wanted them to stay with him.
Yes. Let's make a tent for them. Let's keep them here. For as long as, this is my childhood heroes. This is Moses, this is Elijah. Lord, let's make 3 tabernacles for them. I can't imagine how excited he was. Daddy said to the Lord, Lord, let me make a tent for you. No. Matter of fact, even the Lord praying, it put him to sleep. But now he was wide awake. But he was wide awake because Moses and Elijah were there, not because Jesus was there. And so what happens almost immediately after Moses and Elijah had their conversation? A cloud came, they disappeared, and the Father spoke from heaven, this is my beloved Son. Pay attention to him. It's Jesus, Peter. You're missing the boat here, Peter. And then he went down off of the mountain. And so, yeah, there's a great lesson in that. That's maybe a little side lesson I gave there, but it's an interesting one to see. Sometimes we are excited about peripheral things around Jesus, but not Jesus himself. People go to church because they love the music. Some people go or don't go because they don't like the music. Whatever. People go because, I've got friends there. We have a community there. But the main reason why we should be going is because Jesus commanded it, and Jesus said, I'm there in a special way where 2 or 3 are gathered together. And so we can get caught up in all those peripherals, the side blessings that come, and that was quite a side blessing for Peter and James and John to experience, Moses and Elijah appearing. But whatever it is, it's probably not as glorious as what happened there. Or even if there was miracles. Oh, I'm going because there's miracles. Go because of Jesus. Be there because of Jesus. Look for Jesus. Just as the Father was looking to the Son, so we need to be looking to Jesus. In Luke 11:1, it says, Now it came to pass as he was praying in a certain place, when he stopped praying, that one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, as John also taught his disciples. And then he gave them as an example prayer. When you pray, say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. I can't get into all of that prayer tonight, or we won't go any further. But it's a beautiful prayer, and there's a lot of teaching in it. And I've taught from this a few times already. But we can see that they heard him praying, and it did something. It stirred them. Lord, teach us to pray. And so he gave them some instruction on how to pray. And I think that there is important. We saw last week, as we talked about prayer, how the centrality of our prayer is to worship Jesus. Remember? Worshiping God. That is the first place in prayer. And then other things will come in. And that's why he says, Our Father in heaven, holy is your name. It's the very beginning of prayer. Okay, and so I think I have it twice here. Now, Jesus speaks to Peter after his fall, before he fell. He said, You're going to betray me 3 times, right? But Jesus said, But I have prayed for you. So not only do we find Jesus praying, I'm sure, much of it worship to the Father. Not only do we find him praying for direction, for the will of God. Not only do we find him praying for wisdom for himself as to what to do, choosing the 12, whatever it is, but also praying for his own, praying for them. And here we have him praying for Peter. And he said, I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, strengthen your brothers. And in John 14:16, Jesus said, and I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper that he may abide with you forever. So all these things happen by prayer. By prayer, things were done. By prayer, apostles were chosen. By prayer, miracles were done. In the life of Jesus. In the life of Jesus. You would say, well, he was God. He didn't need prayer. He could just do it. No, he chose to empty himself and to be dependent on the Father. And that is expressed in him praying. By prayer, everything was accomplished. And at one point, as the Lord Jesus looked and he saw the ones that were coming to Christ and the ones that weren't, he said, at that time, Jesus answered and said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. You've hidden these things from the wise and the prudent, and you've revealed them to babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in your sight. He understood the workings of the Father. He was grateful to the Father. He saw that the Father was keeping the proud and the haughty away, but he was allowing the babes to come to Jesus, the innocent ones. Now, at the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead, what do we find Jesus doing? John 11:41. They took the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Jesus had told them, take away the stone, right? Martha had protested, but nevertheless, at your word, she did it. And what did Jesus do? He lifted up his eyes and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. And there's what you said, Stephanie. There was example being given here, wasn't there? And when he had said these were things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. But it was bathed in prayer. Oh, what do we think we're going to do without prayer if Jesus needed to? In John 12:27, when people had come to see Jesus, the Greeks had come to see Jesus, and they were like Andrew and Philip were like, Greeks are coming to see him now. What are we going to do with this? So they came and told Jesus, there's Greeks that want to see you. Like, these aren't Jews, these are Greeks, right? So Jesus told them, the hour has come. Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And then, so he speaks about himself, and then he speaks to them that you need to be a grain of wheat that dies so that you can bear much fruit. But here's what he says to the Father following that discourse in John 12:27. Now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour. And so there he's expressing already the knowing that he was going to die, knowing it was not long before they would take him and crucify him. My soul is troubled. But Father, can you save me from this hour? No, for this purpose I came to this hour. And then he says, Father, glorify your name. I wonder, when we are facing troubles and trials, do we turn to our Father? Do we ask him for that deliverance? But do we accept as well there are times when I will not be delivered from, but I can be delivered through? Jesus was delivered through, wasn't he? Eventually. But we can lose sight of all hope and all help and miss the very presence of God when we need him the very most. And that's often the tragedy in our lives. When we are the most broken and the most in need of God, it is often the time when we actually turn to him less. But that's not what Jesus did here, as his soul was troubled. So I encourage all of you, if your soul is troubled, come to the Lord. And come with a willing heart, that whatever your will is, not mine, but whatever your will is, oh God, I am willing to submit to it. And you can see what the center of his prayer was in the midst of his own troubled soul was what?
Glorify his Father.
Glorify your Father. Glorify the Father. Father, glorify your name. Should it not be for us that the center of our desire is that the Lord is glorified? even if it's in my troubles, that he be glorified. And the Father's answer is what? I have both. The voice spoke from heaven. They thought it thundered, the people around him. A voice came from heaven saying, I have both glorified it, and I will glorify it again. Now, in the garden, I don't have the first prayer here, but we know that Jesus prayed 3 times in the garden. We know that he brought Peter, James, and John with him. You know that he asked them to watch and pray lest they fall into temptation. We know that he actually rebuked them because they had fallen asleep. He wanted companions with him in the darkest hour as he was praying. And 3 times he came before the Father, he fell on his face and prayed. And, when a person falls on their face on the ground, it's pretty deep, right? They're very moved. He knew that what he was about to bear was unbearable without the grace of God, and yet he knew he had to bear it. And so he prayed, and he prayed, Father, if this cup does not pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. But he asked the cup be taken from him, but he said, nevertheless, your will be done. He went away again, and he prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words. I got the verse backwards here. So in Matthew 26:36, he said, he came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, sit here while I go and pray over there. He went a little farther, fell on his face and prayed, saying, oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Now, was there any question whatsoever that Jesus Christ knew that he was going to die on the cross? So why would he be on his face in the garden asking if there's another way? And why would we know about it?
Because it wasn't easy, and he wanted us to know it wasn't easy.
That's a very good answer. It wasn't easy, and he wanted us to know it. He wanted to reveal the depth of the agony of soul that he was facing. But was it just for us? Or was it actually heartfelt prayer?
It was heartfelt because he cried tears of blood.
Absolutely. It was heartfelt prayer. It was from the deepest and most difficult place. It was from the place of facing the cross. But remember, he was going to be facing the ugliness of sin being laid on him and the separation from the Father that he cried out at the cross. He knew what he was facing. It wasn't just the whips and the nails and the lashings, whatever that he experienced, and the crown of thorns and all that darkness. It was the spiritual, psychological, and physical darkness that he was to face. And he felt the agony of it. And it was like, oh, Father, if there's any other way. But nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And he had already told them 3 times, the disciples, he was going to be crucified. He knew what was going to happen. But this is the depth of heart cry that we see expressed here. So God knows that there are times when you will have a heart cry to God. And you will actually ask for deliverance from whatever trial you are going through. And that you're not going to get it. But he doesn't mind you coming, and he doesn't mind you pouring out your heart. He wants you to pour out your heart. But in the end, remember, he does know best. Twice we find Jesus praying when he was on the cross. And the 2 prayers are, Luke 23:34, Jesus said, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they do. And they were dividing his garments and cast lots. So what does that tell us about Jesus praying here in this moment? Where's his heart in this moment?
He's asking for forgiveness for them.
His heart is for others, right?
Yeah.
His heart's for others.
Well,
Let me encourage you to make sure that all you're praying is not about you, but it's actually for others. That it's for others as well. And you may say, well, I got nothing left for others right now. All I got is me. Well, if anybody had nothing left for others, it would have been Jesus. But that there he was, praying for others. And we find him, of course, taking the energy, which was extreme, to be able to speak. Because in order to speak, he had to push himself up because there's no air getting out of his lungs because of crucifixion. It stops you from being able to breathe. In order to take a breath, you have to push yourself up. In order to say something, you have to push that air out in order to speak. In Luke 23:46, and when Jesus cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And that was the last prayer of Jesus while he was here on earth. And it was a beautiful prayer because he knew exactly where he was going, into the presence of God. And it actually is a prayer of victory here because he knew where he was going. Now, I don't have time to go through John 17:9 tonight. We actually talked through that entire chapter a while back. But my encouragement to you is to read the prayer of Jesus. It is the longest prayer of Jesus that you'll find. We read I think we read every other one. And it is very thorough. And you see him glorifying the Father. You see him acknowledging who he is. You see him praying for his own. You see him being specific about his prayers for them. You see him praying for those who would believe in him. And so who's that? The ones that were going to believe in him in the future. Who was he praying for there? Us, yeah. He was praying for us. So there's a lot in John 17, beautiful stuff in John 17 in the prayer of Jesus. But what I wanted to do was just share with you and maybe to realize the absolute necessity of prayer in your life and to actually challenge you to go deeper in prayer. More time away from God, away from the world and in the presence of God. And to actually, if you do not will to make that time, you won't make it. Now you can, of course, ask the Father to make it happen in your life. Pray. Pray by yourself. Find others to pray with. And seek God. Because you need him more than you know. It is an absolute necessity. You cannot survive. You cannot survive and live this Christian life without prayer. If Jesus needed to pray, how much more